right, good morning. So this is episode 2 in the Dark Age of Man tutorial series. This is looking at the glossy Drive to RPG premium book, and we're going to go through pages 28 through 31, How to Play Dark Age of Man. All right, so you can see it's reflecting the light above my head. Not great, but that's glossy for you, right? So let's go to page 28. So we covered how to create a character, page 21 through 27. Now we're going to cover playing Dark Age of Man. So one of the things Dell and I really wanted to do with our game system, let me turn it here, uh, was keep it simple and interpretive, right? So it would be super easy to adjudicate and to play, but also allow for that shared narrative conversation, right? Where we easily converse about the narrative situation, sharing the characters. Characters are the first thing in Dark Age of Man. You are meant to embody a human being in this particular place, this particular time, and you are going to have hopefully some desire as to who your personality is, what your goals and your motives are, etc. And that will show up through your repute, how you distinguish yourself through your 3 repute when you create a character, and then hopefully you set foot in the world to go about dealing with the things the naive narrator, our presenter, will put in front of you as issues, dilemmas, situations. Okay, so we open it with just a simple conversation between a character and the presenter, and kind of hopefully setting the tone of how the player kind of just declares what he's doing and goes. Nowhere in here does the presenter ask for a die roll, right? Because the player is certainly capable of these things, right? These are subtle things that may or may not be caught when you read it, right? What is the point of this? Well, it's hopefully subliminally casting a shadow upon the frontal cortex in which you're gonna recognize the pattern of play, right? Actions as tasks. So here we go. Now we get into it, and our goal was to make the game, short descriptions of rules, and these rules, of course, very much typical, right? I mean, what is an action and a task? Well, name a role-playing game that does not have these 2 things, right? When a player declares an action, it may be a task. If it's a task, it will require the presenter to come up with a difficulty value, and then the presenter will either ask the player to make a die roll, adding the appropriate attribute to the roll to see if they achieve the thing, right? So again, it's a rollover system, equal to or over, very simple, D12, right? Nothing complicated. The difficulty value is derived subjectively, or it can be derived from the actual creature. So let's say they're negotiating with a Viking from the back of the book, and the Viking is a DV of 9. Well, you can begin with that as your standard, right? Okay, they're in the middle of a conversation with a Viking in a tavern. He's surrounded by enemies. His DV is 9. Those enemies are minions. That means, right, that if there's a combat, as his minions are easily killed through combat rolls, his DV could come down. So I could start it at 9, or I could say, you know what, this guy's really not looking for trouble, so I'm going to lower it a little bit to 7, because he doesn't really want to fight now. He's here to learn a little bit about the village, maybe come back with an army, right? Or I put it at 12 because he's an ignorant, dangerous barbarian who's looking to kill somebody today, right? But the reality is it's subjective, but I can base it upon the creature in the book, right? So now the other thing is players can call upon these things, right? So the presenter doesn't just say, oh man, that's a mind check, make a die roll, you got to beat an 8. The player can say, listen, I want to open the door with a wave of my hand on the way toward the door of the tavern, which is bolted shut. I want to, as I approach the door with a wave of my hand, unbolt it and open the door before me as I walk through. Okay, that's a magic, that's a words of power, right? And he whispers under his breath some Latin word of power, and the bolt would lift and move, and the door would swing open, and everybody in the tavern would see, my power show, don't tell, right? And he declares a mind check. I would set the DV. Well, it's not, it ain't like locked. It's just bolted. We're going to set that DV to 6. He makes a mind check, and indeed he succeeds. The door bolt comes open. The door swings open, and everybody in the tavern witnesses it and gasps, and he waltzes out the door without ever touching anything, right? That is something. So players can also say, hey, I'm going to mix a concoction here I'm going to go out and collect some ragweed and some juniper bush or blah, 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 blah. And I'm going to mix up a potion to help this person sleep, right? Okay. If the mind's a 4, I might just waive that, or they declare, right? And I say, well, the DV is going to be easy for you because you're good at this and you've described so well what this takes to do, right? And we have a description like that in the back. So again, next is the task difficulty value. I've already described that, right? It is subjective, but should be based on whether you're trying to really affect the world or just to affect a person, etc. So certainly, trying to make scene-changing things could push the DV up, right? The Viking's a 9, but I stand alone in the tavern against the Viking and 7 of his minions, and I say to the Viking, "You need to leave town peacefully." Well, it's me versus a Viking with 7 of his buddies. That DV is going to creep up to maybe an 11 or 12, right? Because who am I to intimidate this Viking in the tavern, right? So it's subjective, but it could creep up or down based on the situation, right? The task roll, again, players roll everything, right? The player rolls everything. They generally are going to be adding simple modifiers based, and those modifiers are going to be their attribute score and maybe a particular item, right? Outside of that, they aren't getting any other modifiers, right? They're going to take the highest single modifier available to them, right? So they don't keep stacking modifiers. So it's very simple math for the player, and the player just rolls the die to see if they've succeeded, right? Who goes first? This was paramount to us because our game is a shared narrative space. There is no such thing as changing into a combat procedure. Who goes first literally occurs in the conversation between the presenter and the players. I say to him, the Viking lashes out with his right hand, trying to smack your face. Make a combat check against DV9. He rolls the dice. The Viking successfully smacks him. We're going to call that a fatigue condition because he's not really wounded, but he's gone to fatigue, and the Viking has smacked him in the face, right? I go first. He makes the roll. Why is this not a problem? Because if I fail the roll, he can actually then negotiate, or not negotiate, excuse me. He then declares, no, I definitely catch his hand and I poke him in the eye. He suffers a fatigue condition. Well, not fatigue. He would take a point of damage, right? So who goes first is quite literally how we narrate the actions. The player literally says, I leap from my horse and dive upon the running bandit. Okay, make a roll. That's a combat check or that's a body check, whatever the, I decide or the presenter decides makes sense. And he makes the roll. If he succeeds, he lands on the bandit, gets what he wants. If he fails, he might miss the bandit and take some damage as he hits the ground, rolling, whatever. So it's going to be completely, absolutely, narratively make sense, and it's going to be completely natural when I declare something in the scene or a player declares something. So this is not meant to turn us into roll initiative. We're going into combat procedure, right? Time and movement, again, same thing. This is meant to be narrative, and it's contextual. It can be macro or micro. It can be macro in an instant and then micro in an instant. As I narrate, you have been 2 weeks on the ocean, your little boat, carving through the waves, and it's rough today as the ocean bounces your boat about, and you have been out here for 2 weeks. You were told it would take 7 days to find the spot. Then the player takes initiative. Who goes first? And he drills into a micro moment, and I turn to the captain. I say, Captain, we are 7 days overdue. Where the hell is the island, right? And we've gone from a macro time and movement, boom, from macro time and movement to bam, micro. We can go right back out, right? So it is contextual to what's happening in the shared narrative space, right? Who rolls the dice? Players roll everything. Very simple. The GM only rolls his RSCs, his 3d6. Combat task rolls. The combat task roll is pretty intense here because it is the most important task rolls that actually are going to affect your player, right? As far as damage or dying or conditions, accruing conditions. And it's the thing that most likely is going to be life or death for your character and for those that you actually commit violence against. So this is a little more detailed. And then we give it a red box example of what combat looks like in the game. Remember, our combat task rolls coincide with the entire project, right? Again, our book is meant to be taken from the first page to the last page, from Mr. Anthony Boyd's forward and describing how he perceives this work, and I think he perceives it 100% accurately. And then, of course, our simple description of our game. And then we go into a comic book because we anticipate, you should anticipate your character is acting like a character in a film or a comic book panel. You declare an action, that's declared. You're going to make a roll. That roll is going to determine what the next comic book panel looks like. And then it's going to narrate dialogue between the players or another description of action between either the Viking or and then we're going to roll the dice and we're going to go to the next comic book panel to narrate the next action, et cetera, et cetera. This is not just for entertainment. This is literally how our game works, especially right in combat, right? So it is an entire, the entire thing is meant to be taken not in pieces, but in whole. Okay. So that's why the comic book, right? And it's also awesome to have the comic book art, and it's beautiful. Okay, then we get over to task roll and difficulty value modifications. I've already talked about this a little bit, but the gist of it is the GM, the presenter, always sets the DV, and that he can fluctuate, or she can fluctuate that DV based on situation, circumstance, or based on a preset variable from a creature, and then we can still modify it up or down. This is what allows us to take into account every single moment live of what a character may do or the results of their actions and vice versa, right? So this DV could go up and down, right? I end up in a battle with the Viking in the tavern and his 7 minions. I succeeded two actual checks in the combat, which means I slay a minion and I slay another minion. Now it's the Viking and his 5 minions. He's lost 2. I lower the DV as this Viking's beginning to realize he's actually seeing his men die at the hands of your character. I then lower the DV. The player then says, are you ready to stop this, or do I have to kill all your men? And we have a roll, prestige check, modified down, and the Viking says, you'll pay for this, and come on, men, let's leave. And they storm out, and the player now has got 2 dead Viking minions on his hands, etc. So we can modify. Words of Power is magic in our game. Very simple way to do this. You have to have a mind of 2+ or a spirit of 2+ for miracles. You declare what that looks like. The presenter, based on whether you're attempting to just affect a thing like a combat check, or you're attempting to change a scene or change the world, the DV should be commiserate with, or should be parallel to that. If I'm trying to open a hole in the world so the Viking and the charging Viking army falls into the hole, I'm going to set that DV very high, because you're attempting to basically change the entire outlook of the war in one roll, right? But if you're just trying to cause a wound to the Viking leader in the tavern, right, and you describe it as such, it's a simple combat check, DV's normal, and it's a wound that's just done through magic, right? Okay. This is important in our game because a 1 is always a failure no matter what, and it's a critical failure. So you don't just fail, you fail critically. This should affect situation, circumstance, complicate things, etc. It doesn't have to be a fumble, so to speak. But a 12 also is always a guaranteed success, and it is always a critical success. So even if I set the DV for you to create this hole for the charging Viking army to fall into, if you roll a 12, you indeed create that hole, and the Viking army would tumble into that hole, right? I might narrate that only some of the Vikings fall into the hole, right? Okay, because you didn't get a 16. You got a 12, but with your +3, it was 15. You didn't get that 16, right? Okay. Character advancement is probably the, outside of some of these others here, a pretty thick description. This is literally how you level up, and you can do that in 2 ways. You can do amazing things that are witnessed by other people. They can be good or bad things, and you can score an instant repute point, which you can spend immediately on your attributes. Or anyone in the group in a session, or the whole group together, can achieve some satisfaction toward ending a minor or a major dilemma, and that will earn the entire group for a session or series of sessions a repute point. Okay, so there's 2 ways to earn. The toughest is the miraculous thing that's witnessed, right? However, again, it can be a dastardly deed that's witnessed. It can be a heroic deed that's witnessed, right? These get a little deeper because there's more required information for these rules, right? Bartering, again, our game does not use gold coins or silver coins or copper. It assumes that there may be some coinage in the world, and it assumes, though, mostly we're going to be bartering, and we're going to be using, say, silver bands or jewelry, items of value. So a Viking wants a sword fixed by the blacksmith. The Viking's going to snap off a piece of silver from his armband in payment for the new sword, right? So it's a purse value. You negotiate what you want, what you're trying to get, and then there may be a purse check against the DV for the situation again, right? Our rules are simple. Actions creates a task roll versus a DV, and we apply the appropriate value, a purse rating, prestige rating, etc. Okay. But the big one in the Dark Ages would be obligations, right? My character goes to Lord Washburn and says, I want a hide of land for my wife and my children. I have been a good serf. I've busted my hump. I want a hide of land to work. And Lord Washburn says, if you'll deliver this missive to the Vikings across the river and can get back successfully alive with their reply, I'll give you a hide of land. And I'm endangering my life to venture across the river to go to the Viking leader and hand him a missive in which Washburn says, leave my country or I'll kill you. There's a good chance they're going to hang the messenger, right? But if I succeed at negotiating that, getting a response from the Viking, and I'm able to get home, I'm going to get a hide of land for my work, right? We have NPC mooks and minions. Mostly this is to represent mass combat. It's also meant to represent having mobs and packs. But more importantly, it represents your character with sidekicks, so to speak. So if I have a prestige of 3, I can have 3 characters that are with me that I can give orders to and I can do things with. But they are ultimately not major players, so they can instantly be removed from the fiction in any kind of narrative description. Sam could narrate they are killed. He can narrate that they vanished or that they went somewhere, whatever. So there's all kinds of ways for this mook or minion to be removed from the narrative, right? Generally, it's probably going to be because I've given them an order and they've gone off to do something, or they are doing something for me that I've successfully charged them with, or they are killed in a combat situation or something, right? Then we have healing, curing, restoring, and removing of curses. This is pretty important because we use conditions, and there's a way to get those conditions reduced. But we also have creatures that on critical failures can cause major conditions, actual effect conditions, injuries, broken bones, sucking your mind to 0, etc. Some of these things can be remedied with a ritual, etc. Some of them can never be remedied. So you need to pay close attention to a critical failure against, let's say, a succubus, right, for instance. And again, very important as we use conditions for the characters, not hit points, right? Last but not least, we have death, killing, and the sparing of life. This is the Middle Ages. This is the Dark Ages. And murder is murder. You can defend yourself. You are going to find yourself in wars. You're going to find yourself, of course, our game has fantasy elements, so you're going to be fighting monsters and creatures too. But the reality is characters should be very aware that they can choose to spare life in demand of ransom for their life or just spare their life with an obligation. I'm not going to kill you here today, Ulfgar, but I'm going to tell you right now, you need to go back and tell your Viking leader that they will not win the day, right? And you spare their life. And that's going to affect, narrative later. So it is important to recognize you do not have to automatically count that final condition as instant death, right? The GM should not declare the player has killed somebody. The player should declare if they want to kill, right? And more importantly, sparing of life is an option the presenter should really think about with characters, in that a Viking may not want to kill you. He'll want to take you under arrest, which we defined in the rule. He'll want to take you captive, make you a slave, or he will want to demand ransom. Depending on your level, right, they're going to want to take you for ransom if you are an alderman. If you're a man of the church, they'll probably hang you from the rafters and kill you, right? If you are a peasant, they aren't going to care. They might turn you into a slave, depending on your condition, right? So if you're a soldier, I could spare your life and turn you into a slave because you're fit. If you're a peasant, basket weaver, then I'm probably, you don't matter to me, right? So we keep these things in mind, right? And that is our rules. That is how you play. Next up, the next episode will feature the most important piece of our game. The most innovative part of our game is the role of the GM, the presenter, and how we prepare the sessions and what we ask the presenter to be in our game, which is a naive narrator. Do not know. Play to find out, right? Do not know. And what I mean by that is, I'll talk about that in the next episode. Thank you for watching this. This has been episode 2, Playing Dark Age of Man. Thank you for watching. Good day.